Torchwood, much like UNIT, is an institute in Doctor Who first mentioned in Series 1 of the revival. In today's video, I will be going over the history of Torchwood and what exactly happened to the institute. I will be briefly going over expanded media, but not going into too much depth. There are so many expanded media stories with Torchwood that it would be physically impossible for me to cover every single detail. Not only that, but the shows also take precedent over expanded media, because expanded media can be retconned any day. Just look at the recent Sutek stuff, with all his big Finnish stories being retconned. The Torchwood Institute was of course founded in the 1800s after Queen Victoria's battle with a werewolf. I should say here that we'll be going over Series 2 events, but not in detail, because I'm assuming people watching this already know what happened. However, agents in the 1800s attempted to capture the 10th Doctor when they realised he'd been stranded in London. They came across H.G. Wells and interrogated him about the Doctor. Wells led them to the TARDIS, which disappeared, apparently leaving the Doctor behind for them to arrest. The man was found not to be the Doctor when he was dissected. By the 1890s, Torchwood had technology to detect interdimensional disturbances. Queen Victoria uses technology to investigate disturbances killing academics in Cambridge, ahead of a vote whether to award women degrees. In 1897, Archie, a member of Torchwood, began the Torchwood Archive. At Torchwood House, Object 1, a gift from the committee to Tassar Alexander, and then passed on to Queen Victoria, was the first entry to the archive. By 1899, a branch of Torchwood had been founded in Cardiff, which was based around a rift in space and time. In 1899, Jack Harkness was also recruited by two of this branch's operatives, as a freelance agent of the Institute. His first mission was to apprehend a blowfish. He succeeded, but was greatly disturbed when one of the operatives executed the creature before his eyes. He continued to work with Torchwood largely against his will. He had been told by a young girl who could see the future using tarot cards that he would have to wait more than a century before seeing the Doctor again. Meanwhile, he needed money to live. He continued work for the organisation over the decades that followed, although he remained disturbed by the Institute's callous disregard for alien lifeform. At a similar point of Captain Jack being moved to Torchwood 2, Victoria also established Torchwood India to collect things alien in the British Raj. I should also say around the same point and throughout Torchwood's history, there was lots of alien artifacts being collected for the Torchwood archive. I'm not going to go through all those artifacts because it's just an insanely long list. It's also just incredibly boring and more science gibbly gabbly gook. In 1901, operatives dug up a future version of Jack Harkness that had been taken from the 21st century and buried in 27 AD Cardiff. He told them to freeze him in the cryo chambers so he could defeat his brother Grey. Subsequently, Jack's future self resided in the cryo chambers even as his younger self continued to work nearby. In 1906, operatives used a machine they commissioned a professor to build to travel to another planet thousands of years in the future. Neither of these operatives returned. The former remained on the planet while the latter was killed. The professor who had commissioned this was returned home by the 10th Doctor. Jack continued to work for Torchwood throughout the 20th century. In 1909, he was put in charge of a group of soldiers who were all killed by fairies. During the First World War, Torchwood were planning to use alien weaponry but eventually decided against it. Further along in 1918, Torchwood 3 investigated ghost sightings in a hospital in Cardiff. As present and future blended, they caught glimpses of the 21st century, receiving instructions from future Torchwood to take shell-shocked soldier Tommy Brocklers from the hospital and keeping him in cryogenic suspension. At this time, they had a team of 5, the leader being a man called Gerald Carter. They already had equipment capable of detecting disturbances in time. In the 1920s, Jack worked undercover with a travelling circus in the pursuit of night travellers, though he was unsuccessful. Just a few years later, in 1923, thanks to a professor, Torchwood found evidence that an alien race called the Pyrovals invaded Earth at Pompeii in 79 AD. This of course being tied to the Series 4 episode of Doctor Who, The Fires of Pompeii. In 1924, Torchwood sent Jack Harkness to India to close down the branch there, led by the Duchess, before the fall of the Raj. It arranged the transportation of all their alien artifacts back to Britain. Torchwood India would secretly persist for decades by using a time store to prevent the passage of time in their former headquarters. In 1927, Jack Harkness was sent on a mission to New York City in order to thwart a plot by the Tricksters Brigade to infect Franklin Roosevelt. During World War II, artifacts belonging to the Torchwood archive were relocated to a Welsh coal mine to protect them from the bombings, and during the 40s there were several plots to defeat the Nazis by Torchwood. In 1941, Torchwood 3 was led by Tilda Brennan, who was manipulated by Billis Manger, the main villain of Series 1 of Torchwood, into intersecting A. Neil, an alien child Jack had brought into the hub, overpowering the rest of the team when they objected. Jack confronted her in the vault, and she held a gun to the head of the teammate Greg Bishop, who was Jack's lover. The light briefly possessed her, enabling Jack to shooter. In the 1950s, Torchwood had to deal with a significant amount of black market trading in alien artifacts as a revolt of number of spacecraft shot down during World War II. By this point in time, Torchwood had grown significantly, that by 1953, the London branch was influential enough that London police feared its involvement when investigating the strange occurrences provoked by the activities of the alien entity known as the Wire. Torchwood 1 agent Lisbeth had ordered for the Wire's victims to be kept in cages. Torchwood 1 during the 1950s had several issues with leadership. I'd highly recommend, if you want a more in-depth review of these issues, to listen to Big Finish's audio Parasite. During the 1950s, Adam Smith took over Torchwood 1 using his memory manipulation abilities and rallied the organization for war against the approaching alien fleet, which was actually seeking him. The member of Torchwood had been tricked into allowing Adam into Torchwood in the first place, and Lisbeth eventually worked out what had happened. Despite numerous setbacks as Adam kept altering their memories, they disabled Torchwood weapons on the day the alien fleet arrived, preventing war and allowing the aliens to send Adam into the void. Skipping forward several years, in 1965, the government asked 5 highly ranked officers, including Jack, to give 12 children to the 456, as a gift in return for an antivirus for mutated form of Indonesian influenza. It was decided that the children would be taken from a Scottish orphanage as they wouldn't be missed. Despite 11 children being taken, Clay MacDonald managed to escape. This was of course seen significantly in the story The Children of Earth. From this point onwards, there's a significant amount of audio stories, which I said I really wouldn't be going into detail if they didn't have much relevance. But let me tell you, there is just an insane amount of Torchwood audio stories that I could just not possibly fit them all in this video. By 1984, Torchwood bought the London-based security firm H.C. Clements, which was seen in the story Runaway Bride. Then, a few years later in 1987, Torchwood sent a doctor to investigate Gabriel Tyler and his psychic powers, hoping to find a breakthrough in understanding the human mind. His experiments were discovered by the 7th Doctor, who claimed he'd never heard of Torchwood when the Doctor revealed his employer's name. By 1991, the Torchwood Tower, known publicly as Canary Wharf, was built to reach a radar black spot, which Torchwood began experimenting on, and became the headquarters of Torchwood 1. The Institute examined the Void ship. At the same time whilst doing this, Torchwood thought they had discovered free energy. However, in doing so, Torchwood were weakening the barriers between their universe and another. On New Year's Eve 1999, Jack became the leader of Torchwood 3, when its current leader, Alex Hopkins, killed the rest of the team and himself after being driven insane by an alien artifact, revealed the events of the coming years. During his rampage, he phoned Torchwood 1, with Yvonne Hartman answering. Yvonne listened to his murders and rambling about Torchwood. It would be during this time that Jack Harkness had plans to reform the organization of Torchwood to greater benevolence. Jack completely disapproved of the ethics of Torchwood 1. Over the next few years from this point, Jack rebuilt the Torchwood 3 team. At a very similar time, Yvonne Hartman became director of Torchwood 1 and rebuilt the Institute. Then later, in 2004, Torchwood 3 shut down Ovid Industries factory, duplicating the population of West Village, recovering an object called Object 1. Jack and Susie passed it on to Yvonne in London, wanting to get rid of it. I should mention at this point, Object 1 has had a very convoluted history with Torchwood. It's just something I've decided to left out of the video due to how convoluted it is. Object 1 could probably have its own video made on it. In March 2006, Torch was sent to London to investigate the alien life form recovered from a crashed spacecraft. Unknown to her, she met the 9th Doctor during this time. Later in 2006, Torchwood 3 responded to the crash of an alien spaceship, unaware that Susie had actually caused it, and Susie was caught up in an alien hunt enabled by the committee. By this point, we've sort of caught up to actual Doctor Who, so this was around the same time Torchwood shot down the alien Sycorax ship. Now, like I said, this is from the point where we've caught up with the main Doctor Who series, and then eventually Torchwood. I'm not going to recap the whole of the Battle of Canary Wharf between the Cybermen, the Daleks, and Torchwood, and then of course all of the Torchwood show. That would just be ridiculous. Go and watch those shows if you haven't already, and if you're watching this video and you haven't watched them, why are you watching this video? It is important to note that after the Battle of Canary Wharf and after the 3 series of Torchwood, Torchwood was pretty much considered disbanded after Captain Jack ran away using his vortex manipulator. Torchwood was left in absolute ruin. Of course, during the events of Children of Earth, Torchwood 3's hub was blown up, and technology from the ruins of the Torchwood 3 hub was rediscovered by the British government. Billionaire Joshua Naismith acquired technology from Savage Torchwood. We could see this in The End of Time. While people also bought quite a bit of the Torchwood technology as well, and Torchwood's money was stolen by banks and laundered. Then that takes us up to the final series of Torchwood, Miracle Day, and Miracle Day is better not mentioned, but by 2012, the name, if not necessarily the function of Torchwood, was widely known by the public, to the extent that the Battle of Canary Wharf had come to be known as the Battle of Torchwood. From this point on, I find Torchwood's history quite boring, because it's just basically a recap of the last several years. Gwen comes back and restarts Torchwood with Jack. Jack leaves again, Jack comes back, and then for some reason in the Big Finish audiobooks, a parallel universe version of Yvonne Hartman comes and helps Jack. By this point, it is basically just the same stories recycled and repeat, but what should be said is that Torchwood continues for a very long time, disbanding, getting back together, disbanding, getting back together. There are several audio adventures which I would highly recommend you go to listen to if you do want the full extent of what happened to Torchwood, but just for this video, they really aren't necessary for me to bring up. However, saying that, the Institute still existed as the Torchwood archive in the 42nd century. It was consulted by the rulers of the Earth Empire that came to be sidelined. The archive warned of the Empress of a coup against her, however she ignored their advice and ultimately fell victim to the coup. What I do find interesting now from this point on is that Torchwood, in some shape or form, actually survived for a long period of time. The last mention of Torchwood was that the Great Cobalt Pyramid was built on the ruins of the Torchwood Institute. Now that is nearly the entire history and what happened to Torchwood. Of course there are details I'm going to miss out because there's just an extensive amount of expanded media. Like genuinely, I think Torchwood might be the most covered expanded media thing apart from maybe the Time War today. There is just so much expanded media on Torchwood that it would be impossible for me to mention every single detail. But I really do hope this video has painted a good picture of what Torchwood was like, Torchwood's history, and what happened after the main series of Torchwood and Doctor Who concluded. Please feel free to leave a like and subscribe. I've been your host Samuel, and I will catch you in the next Doctor Who related video.